The first sign that something was wrong was the silence. Concord 9 Station was never quiet. 4,000 cadets from 41 species lived there, studied there, argued and ate and trained there. The corridors always had noise, footsteps, voices, the hum of ventilation running through metal walls. But when the diplomatic transport locked into Docking Bay 7, every cadet on the eastern side of the station stopped talking at the same time. The silence spread like a held breath. Word had gone around 2 days earlier. A Dracathea cub was coming. Most cadets had looked up the Dracathea immediately. What they found did not comfort them. The Dracathea were apex predators from a high-gravity world where almost everything alive tried to kill everything else. They had 6 limbs, bone plating under their hide, thermal pits above their jaw that let them sense body heat through walls, and a growl that the database listed as capable of causing physical discomfort in 17 known species. They were also, by galactic standards, terrifyingly intelligent. They had reached the stars on their own. They had joined the Galactic Council not because anyone invited them, but because they arrived and no one told them they could not. The cub was 4 years old. In Dracathea terms, that was equivalent to a large and unpredictable juvenile who had not yet learned all the reasons to hold back. Her name was Vora. She came out of the transport container on a reinforced leash held by 3 handlers in full protective gear. She was the size of a large earth bear, low to the ground, heavy, with bone ridges running down her back that had not yet fully hardened. Her eyes caught the light and held it. She moved slowly, not because she was calm, but because she was reading everything at once: the smells, the air currents, the heat signatures of the cadets watching from behind the safety barrier. 200 cadets watched her. Not one of them moved. Vora pulled once against the leash. Just once. One of the handlers stumbled 3 steps forward before the others caught him. A sound went through the crowd, not a scream, just a sharp exhale from 200 chests at once. By the end of the first day, she had tested every wall in her assigned wing. By the second day, she had fractured the reinforced door of her containment suite. Not broken through, just fractured it, as though she wanted them to know she could. On the third night, a ventilation malfunction let her scent drift into the main dormitory corridor, and 17 cadets from the East Wing filed emergency relocation requests before morning. Commander Osel, the station's senior officer, gave a briefing the next morning. He was Havari, tall, gray-skinned, calm in the way that people are calm when they have spent 30 years managing impossible situations. He told the assembled cadets that Vora was a diplomatic gesture from the Dracathea, a sign of trust, the first of its kind. She would remain for 1 academic year. She was not a pet, not a weapon, and not their problem. They were to stay out of her designated zones and proceed with their studies. Most cadets nodded and made plans to request courses on the station's far side. Reed Calloway did not file a relocation request. He sat in the back of the briefing room and listened. He was not remarkable to look at, medium height, unremarkable face, ranked 31st in his cohort on merit scores that were solid but not impressive. He was there on an academic scholarship, the first in his family to be accepted. His minor was xenobiology. He had chosen it because, as he had once written in an application essay, he thought most species made more sense up close than they did in a file. After the briefing, he walked to the edge of the barrier zone outside Vora's wing. He stood there for a few minutes, just looking at the closed corridor beyond the line. He could not see her, but he could hear something, a low, rhythmic sound, almost subsonic, coming from somewhere deep in the wing. She was packing, the same stretch of floor back and forth, back and forth. He counted the interval between each pass and worked out the distance, about 6 meters. He took out his journal and wrote it down, not because he had a plan, just because it seemed like the kind of detail that mattered. His bunkmate Duno found him there 10 minutes later. Duno was Irelin, 6-limbed, with a set of secondary eyes that never fully closed, which made him look permanently worried. He often was. You are standing at the barrier line, Duno said. Yes, Reed said. Of your own choice. Yes. Duno looked at the closed corridor, then back at Reed, with the expression of someone who had just watched a person step toward something they should have stepped away from. She fractured a reinforced door, he said. I know, Reed said. Those are rated for 2 tons of pressure. I know. Duno waited for more. Nothing came. Reed was still looking at the corridor, pen in hand, listening to the packing. I'm going to the far dining hall, Duno said carefully. The one near the west observation deck. Far from here, you should come. I'll eat later, Reed said. Duno left. Reed stayed another few minutes, then walked back to his bunk, ate a ration bar at his desk, and opened his xenobiology database to everything recorded about Dracathea cub behavior. There was not much. Most researchers who had tried to study them up close had not lasted long enough to publish thorough notes. What existed was thin and old. He read until the station's lights dimmed for the artificial night cycle. He did not file a transfer request. The database on Dracathea cub behavior had exactly 4 usable sources. Reed read all of them twice. 3 were incident reports written by handlers who had mostly documented what went wrong. The 4th was a short paper from a xenobiologist named Dr. Oru Saul, who had spent 6 weeks observing a Dracathea family group from a safe distance 2 decades ago. Dr. Saul had never been close enough to touch any of them, but she had been close enough to watch. The paper described something called scent mirroring. Dracathea cubs, Dr. Saul wrote, did not bond through play or food or proximity alone. They bonded through repeated, non-threatening presence. A creature that came close and left, over several days without showing aggression or fear, began to register in the cub's perception as something other than prey or threat. There was a 3rd category. Dr. Saul had not found a clean word for it. She had written simply, something that belongs in the same space. There were also 2 things that made bonding impossible. The first was running. Running triggered the hunt reflex without exception. The second was offering food with a tool, tongs, a tray, anything held at arm's length. In Dracathea culture, food offered with a tool meant the giver believed the recipient was too weak or too dangerous to receive it directly. It was, apparently, a deep insult. Every handler who had tried to feed Vora through the slot in her door had gotten the same response. She knocked the tray back through the slot so hard it dented the wall. She had not eaten properly in 9 days. Reed read that 3 times. Then he closed the database, sat still for a moment and thought. He did not tell Commander Osel. He did not tell Instructor Barath, who was the assigned Dracathea specialist and who had spent most of the past week writing reports about containment protocol. He did not tell Duno, because Duno would look at him with that worried expression and say something accurate about reinforced doors. He simply went to the barrier line that evening, after the corridor cleared out, sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, and opened his coursework notes. He did not cross the line, he did not speak, he did not bring food. He just sat there. Nothing happened the first night. He stayed an hour, then went to sleep. The second night the same, an hour, quiet. His notes, the dim corridor light, and somewhere in the wing beyond, the low sound of Vora's packing. On the 3rd night, the packing stopped about 20 minutes after he sat down. He did not look up. He kept his eyes on his notes. His heart rate went up, but he breathed through it slowly and did not move. The silence from beyond the barrier was a different kind of silence than the empty kind it had weight in it. He left after an hour. When he reached his bunk, he realized his hands had been steady the whole time. On the 4th night, he sat down and looked up from his notes after 10 minutes, just once. Vora was sitting on her side of the barrier line. She had come all the way to the edge. She was low to the ground, forelegs folded under her chest, her thermal pits aimed directly at him. Her eyes were open. She was not growling. She was simply watching him the way, A very old and very patient predator watches, something it has not yet decided what to do with. Reed looked at her for about 3 seconds, then he looked back at his notes. He stayed 2 hours that night. Duno found out the next morning. He had checked the corridor's passive monitor log out of concern, and there it was: Reed, floor, barrier line, 4 consecutive nights, one Dracotha cub increasingly close on the other side. Duno came to Reed's bunk before breakfast and stood in the doorway with his secondary eyes all the way open. "You have been sitting next to the Dracotha cub," he said. "Near her," Reed said. "Not next to her, there's a line." "She was 2 meters from you." 1.8, Reed said. "I measured the barrier zone width from the station schematic." Duno sat down on his own bunk. He was quiet for a moment, then, "Why?" Reed thought about how to explain it. "She stopped eating," he said, "and she's packing the same 6 meters every night. That's not aggression. That's an animal that's overwhelmed and doesn't know how to stop." He paused. "I'm not doing anything. I'm just being something that doesn't run and doesn't make demands. That's all." Duno looked at him for a long time. "That is either very smart or very dangerous," he said. "I know," Reed said. "But she's alone, Duno. She came from a pack species and she's completely alone, and nobody is doing anything except writing containment reports." Duno did not argue with that. He just asked Reed to at least tell him when he went each night, so that someone would know where he was. Reed agreed. He did not mention that on the 4th night, when he finally stood to leave, Vora had made a sound. Very low, almost below hearing. Not a growl, something else entirely. He had written it down when he got back to his bunk, but he did not yet have words for what it meant. He just knew it was different from every sound she had made before. It started with a maintenance drone. The small machines ran through the corridors at night, checking seals, sensors, ventilation grates. They were quiet enough that most cadets never noticed them, but their diagnostic ping, a short, high-frequency sound used to test corridor acoustics, sat at a range that Reed had not known about until it was too late to matter. To human ears it was nothing, barely audible like a note played on a distant instrument. To Dracotha hearing, which ran deep into frequencies no human could fully register, it landed like a shriek. Reed was at the barrier line when it happened. He heard the faint tone from the drone rounding the corner behind him. He had half a second to look up before the sound hit the wing beyond the barrier. Vora came through the barrier door before anyone realized it was open. The emergency protocols were supposed to lock it on sensor alert. The malfunction report filed later would note that the drone's own signal had interfered with the lock's frequency receiver. 2 systems in the wrong place at the wrong time. It took 4 seconds for the backup to engage, and by then she was already through. She moved fast. Not a charge, she was disoriented, her head swinging, the thermal pits working overtime to read a corridor full of sudden heat signatures. 6 cadets were at the far end of the hall returning from a late study session. They saw her the moment she cleared the door. 2 of them ran. She tracked the movement, her whole body turned toward them. "Don't run," Reed said. He said it loud enough to cut through the alarm that had just started blaring. He did not know if it would work. He said it because it was the only thing he knew for certain mattered. 2 of the cadets who had not yet run froze. The 2 who had run were already around the corner. Vora took 2 steps toward where they had gone, then stopped, confused by the competing signals' movement that way, but the heat signatures she had been tracking for 5 nights directly behind her. Reed stepped forward, not toward her from the front. He moved to the side. The way he had read was non-threatening in Dracotha body language, lateral, low, not a direct approach. He crouched down. The alarm was loud. The lights had shifted to the red emergency cycle. The 4 remaining cadets at the end of the corridor were pressed against the wall, completely still. Reed started to hum. He had read about it in Dr. Saul's paper. In a small paragraph near the end, Dracathea mothers produced a sustained low-frequency vibration to calm cubs in distress. Dr. Saul had described it as something between a purr and a sub-bass resonance, not replicable by most species' vocal cords. She had not thought it worth studying further because no one else could do it. Reed could not do it either. Not really. His voice was wrong for it, too light, too human. But he hummed low in his chest, the lowest note he could hold steady, and he kept it even, and he did not stop. Vora turned around. She looked at him. Her body was still tense, plates raised, limbs braced, the fight or flight of a predator in a space it did not understand. But she looked at him, and whatever signal she was reading from him, the familiar heat signature, the 5 nights of undemanding presence, the sound that was almost right even if it was not perfect, something in it reached her. She took one step toward him, then another. Then she sat down beside him, right there in the red-lit corridor full of blaring alarms, and pressed the top of her skull against his shoulder, hard enough that he had to brace his feet on the floor. The bone plating was warm. Reed kept humming. The alarm cut off 2 minutes later when Commander Osel manually overrode it from the control room. The silence that followed was enormous. The 4 cadets at the end of the corridor did not move. The corridor cameras recorded everything. Osel watched the footage feed in real time from the control room. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he picked up the communication line to Admiral Seun's office and said, "You need to see something." The footage reached galactic news relays within 6 hours. By morning, it had been viewed across 31 systems. A human cadet, crouched on a corridor floor, humming. A Dracathea apex predator cub pressed against his shoulder. An alarm going silent around them like the station itself had decided to wait and see. Reed did not know any of that yet. He was still sitting on the floor when the medical team arrived. Vora lifted her head when the team came around the corner, and a low warning sound came from her chest. Reed put his hand on the bone ridge at the back of her neck, the same gesture he had seen in one photograph in Dr. Saul's paper, the way a mother held a cub. Vora went quiet again. "Give us a minute," Reed said to the medical team. They gave him several. Elder Arak arrived 9 days later. He came alone, which was itself a statement. A Dracathea elder traveling without a guard complement meant either deep trust or a message that no guard was needed because he was sufficient. Looking at him, most people assumed the second. He was old by Dracathea standards. The bone plating on his shoulders had gone pale at the edges, and 3 of his 6 limbs moved with the particular careful weight of joints that had taken damage and healed wrong over many decades. But he stood nearly 2.5 meters tall, and when he walked down the docking corridor, the station staff on either side found reasons to step back without quite knowing why. He asked to see 2 things: first, the footage; second, the human. They showed him the footage in a private room. He watched it without a word. He watched it 3 times. Then he sat still for a moment in the way that very large predators sit still, not relaxed, but fully controlled, and said he was ready to meet the cadet. Reed was brought to a meeting room on the neutral administrative level. Commander Osel was present. So was Admiral Seun, joining through a monitor link from the Council Relay Station. Instructor Barath was there to translate. Reed sat down across from Elder Arak. He did not pretend to be calm. He was nervous, and he knew it was visible, but he sat straight and kept his hands still on the table. Elder Arak studied him for a long moment. Then he asked through Barath a single question. "Why did you not run?" Reed thought about it for a moment, not performing the pause, actually thinking. Then he said, "Because running wouldn't have helped her. She wasn't attacking. She was scared. If I ran, I confirmed the fear." Barath translated. Elder Arak was silent. Then he spoke for a long time, and Barath translated in pieces. "The head press," Barath said slowly, "was not a behavior. It was not instinct in the simple sense. It was a choice, one that Dracotha cubs made exactly once in early life. When they identified the first non-kin being they would recognize as Anchor. An anchor was a permanent bond under Dracotha law. It carried responsibilities and recognitions that Bareth was struggling to translate cleanly, but the core of it was this. Reed Calloway was now legally, culturally, and spiritually recognized as kin to Vora by the oldest framework the Dracotha had. No non-Dracotha had ever been entered into that framework before. Admiral Sune, on the monitor, asked very carefully whether this had political implications. Elder Arak replied and Bareth translated, "Everything has implications. That is not the point. The point is that the cub chose correctly." He then looked at Reed again and asked a second question. Did he know what he had done when he hummed? Reed said he had read about it in a xenobiology paper. He knew his voice was the wrong frequency. He had not been sure it would do anything. Elder Arak made a sound that Bareth identified, after a moment, as the Dracotha equivalent of a dry laugh. He spoke again. "He says," Bareth translated, "that the frequency was wrong, but the intent was correct. The cub heard the effort, that matters more." Osel, who had been quiet the whole time, wrote something in his report log and did not show it to anyone. Duno found Reed afterward in the corridor outside the meeting room. He had been waiting there for an hour, too anxious to leave. "What happened?" Duno asked. "I'm in the Dracotha kin registry," Reed said. Duno stared at him. "As of this morning," Reed added. "Elder Arak filed it before he came to the meeting." Duno's secondary eyes opened all the way. "You are legally a predator's family." "Apparently." "Reed." "I know. You are in 14 separate research papers." Reed blinked. "Already." 12 as of yesterday, probably more now. Duno looked at him with genuine bewilderment. "Do you understand what has happened?" Reed leaned against the wall and thought about it honestly. He had sat on a floor for 5 nights. He had hummed a note he could not quite hit. He had not run when it would have been reasonable to run. None of it had felt significant at the time. It had just felt like the obvious thing. "Not entirely," he admitted. 3 months after the corridor incident, Reed received a data packet from a Havari academic institution. Inside was a published paper arguing that his behavior was a statistical anomaly, a one-time result of unusual circumstances, and that it should not be used to revise general assessments of human capability in high-stress interspecies situations. He read it once, noted that the author had cited the corridor footage but had not cited Dr. Saul's xenobiology paper, and then closed it and went to breakfast. Vora was asleep outside his bunk room door when he stepped out. She had started doing that sometime in the 3rd week after the incident, once the new protocols allowed her controlled access to the corridor. She would not sleep inside the room. The ceiling was too low for comfort. But she slept in the corridor, perpendicular to his door, which meant anyone wanting to reach Reed first had to get past 400 kilograms of apex predator. 3 cadets had tried to wake him for study sessions before learning this. They had all survived, but none of them tried again. Reed stepped over her tail carefully, which he had learned to do without looking. She opened one eye, registered his heat signature, and closed it again. Life had found a rhythm. He had learned 14 distinct Vora behaviors by observation, the meaning of the low warning sound, the difference between her alert posture and her hunting posture, the particular way she moved her front left limb when she was bored versus when she was uncomfortable. She had, in turn, learned his schedule with an accuracy that slightly unnerved him. She always appeared near the biology lab 5 minutes before his class ended. The Havari theorist's paper spread through academic circles. It was discussed, debated, and largely accepted in species communities that had political reasons to prefer it. Humans were 11 years into galactic society. It was convenient for certain parties to believe their presence was unremarkable. Then the airlock happened. It was a Thresh diplomat's juvenile, a small creature, fast-moving, curious in the way that young things are curious before fear fully develops. It had wandered into a restricted maintenance section, and a pressure door had cycled shut behind it. The door's manual release required a three-stage sequence from inside. The Thresh juvenile was old enough to follow instructions, but the Thresh had a paralysis reflex that triggered on loud sounds or sudden movements. Standard rescue protocol involved emergency tool teams. Emergency tool teams were loud. Every trained responder on that corridor section was told to stand down. Reed was walking past the access hatch when he heard the small sound from inside. He stopped. He crouched next to the hatch vent. "Hey," he said quietly. "You're okay. I'm just going to talk to you for a minute. You don't have to do anything yet." The Thresh juvenile made a small frightened sound back. Reed talked. He talked slowly and quietly about nothing in particular, what the airlock door looked like, what the handle felt like, what would happen next. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. When the juvenile's breathing steadied, he started explaining the three-stage release in the same calm, quiet tone, one step at a time, with pauses between each step to let it settle. 41 minutes after Reed crouched at that hatch, the door cycled open. The Thresh juvenile came through the door and immediately gripped Reed's arm with all four hands. It held on for 2 hours. Rescue teams, translators, and the juvenile's parent all arrived during this time. The juvenile did not let go. The Havari academic who had written the paper retracted it 11 days later. The retraction was short. It said only that the original paper had relied on insufficient observational data and that the author had revised his assessment. Admiral Sune sent a message to Earth's Galactic Affairs Office. The message asked, formally, whether Reed Calloway's behavior in both incidents was representative of human response patterns in high-stress interspecies situations, or whether he was an outlier. Earth's Galactic Affairs Office consulted 3 behavioral departments, read the incident reports, discussed it for 2 days, and replied honestly, more or less. Sune read the response twice. Then she filed it under a new category she created specifically for it, Humans General. Reed found out about the retracted paper from Duno, who had set a notification for anything with Reed's name in it, partly out of concern, and partly because he had learned that Reed himself never checked. "The Havari theorist took back his paper," Duno said. "Which one?" Reed said. Duno stared at him. "How many do you think there are?" Reed thought about it. "A few." 14 confirmed, Duno said. "Possibly 19 if you count preprints." Reed ate his ration bar and went back to his notes. Outside his bunk room door, Vora shifted in her sleep, her bone plating clicking softly as she rolled. The transport came for Vora on a morning when the station's artificial light was still at its early pale setting, the kind that made the corridors look like the inside of a cloud. The plan had always been 1 year. Reed had known that. He had known it from the first week, when he was still sitting on a corridor floor reading xenobiology notes at the barrier line. It had not made him do anything differently. It just meant he had known, for a long time, that one morning there would be a transport at Docking Bay 7. He walked her there himself. She matched his pace, which was slower than her natural gait. She had learned his walk the way she had learned everything about him, by watching it until it was just information, not performance. The corridor was mostly empty at that hour. A few early cadets stopped and moved to the side, not out of fear anymore, exactly, more out of the understanding that something was happening that did not need an audience. Instructor Barath and 2 handlers were waiting at the bay entrance. They stepped back when Vora looked at them, not from fear, but from the quiet professional sense that they were not part of this particular moment. Reed stopped at the docking threshold. Vora stopped beside him. She turned and pressed her skull against his chest. Not the sharp contact of the corridor incident, this was slow, deliberate, held. The bone plating was warm through his uniform. He put his hand on the ridge at the back of her neck, the gesture Elder Arak had shown him, The one that meant I will not forget you, or something close enough to it that the difference did not matter. He held it for a while. Then she pulled back. She looked at him once directly, with the full weight of whatever a Dracathea's gaze carried, and then she walked through the transport door. He watched the seal close. He stood there until the bay viewport showed the transport undocking. Then he walked back. He did not hear about the kin registry update until Duno told him a week later. Elder Arak had, upon returning to the Dracathea homeworld, formally expanded Reed's entry. It was no longer just an anchor notation. It was a full kin recognition, a first, without any precedent for any non-Dracathea being. The document had been transmitted to the Galactic Council the same day Arak arrived home. It moved through the galactic community the way important quiet things move slowly, then all at once. Certain delegations asked for clarification. Others asked for copies. A Havari Cultural Institute requested an interview with Reed, which Reed politely declined because he had an exam that week. The Thresh diplomatic mission sent a formal gift to the Academy on his behalf, which he did not find out about until a box appeared on his bunk with his name on it in 4 scripts he could only partially read. He finished the year ranked 18th in his cohort. Instructor Barath had given him full academic credit for the xenobiology protocols he had helped design, new frameworks for cub integration, non-threatening approach methodology, sensory load management in contained spaces. It was the most read internal academy document of the cycle. Commander Osel's end-of-year evaluation had a section for notable qualities. Osel sat in front of that section for a long time. He typed something, read it, and deleted it. He did this 4 times. Eventually he wrote, "See attached incident reports, speaks for itself." He submitted it and went home. 3 weeks after Vora's departure, a small package arrived in a diplomatic pouch with no sender name. Inside, wrapped in a material Reed did not recognize, was a fragment of bone plating. Not carved or shaped, shed naturally, the way juvenile plating releases during growth. The edges were clean. It was warm to the touch even after transit, which should not have been physically possible but was. He turned it over in his hands for a while. He looked up the tradition which he had not known about before. Dracathea shed their juvenile plating once in the transition between youth and adulthood. They gave the shed pieces to their anchors. It meant, "Part of me stays with you." He put it on his desk next to his notes. Then he opened his coursework for the next semester and started reading. The galaxy had spent 11 years watching humans arrive and trying to work out what exactly they were supposed to be. They had theories, some diplomatic, some dismissive, a few quietly afraid. None of the theories had accounted for this particular thing. A person who would sit on a cold floor for 5 nights without expectation, who would hum an imperfect note in the middle of an alarm, who would crouch by an airlock for 41 minutes and just talk. Vora had not needed 11 years to figure it out. She had needed 4 nights.